Welcome to the Think and Tackle podcast. Now, if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now, today it is our considerable honour to be joined by a man whose influence over carp fishing has spanned 40 years and more. Tim Paisley, thank you so much for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
Now, I think, first of all, we need to address this huge tome on the table in front of us. Very exciting for people like me who love your writing, Tim. Tell us a little bit about a carp memoir.
Well, it came about, I helped the Carp Society put together Every Picture Tells a Story, which is actually a legacy from Richardson, my major hero from the world of carp fishing. And we had a brief, and Damo's in it and contributed nicely. And I've told Damo he should write a book, but he's very reticent about it. So we had this brief of 15 pictures to tell a story about. And I looked through the pictures, and there were thousands that I wanted to write about and tell a story about. So that was 3 years ago. So three and a half years ago, I started putting together the chapters. A lot of it is, how did I arrive here sort of thing. You know, you get nice things said about you, legend and icon and whatever. And I'm just another guy trying to make a hit, who finished up somewhere I never ever expected to be. So a lot of it is about the influences who caused that. I came into carp fishing, my vision of seriously, on the wake of Hutchinson and Yates at Redmire, which was huge influence. Then like Savay followed, and the Fred Wilton stuff was breaking at the same time. So you had Hutchinson on attraction, Fred Wilton on nutrition. And it was, at the time, people don't understand now, it was just opening up a brave new world entirely. Carp were more complex creatures than we could ever give them credit for. And I think it is the competitiveness of carp fishing and the great minds who were applied to that competitiveness that has led to all the advances in carp fishing that people are just trying to refine along the way. Because there isn't much of novelty since the 70s. It's been refined. Lennon and Middleton and Kevin Maddox with the hair was at the end of the 80s. So by the end of the 80s, you'd got the full package of attraction, nutrition, and the bare hooks. And to me, everything has developed hugely through there because there are so many great minds and people of great ability attracted to carp fishing.
Now, you're clearly very modest, Tim, to suggest that you find yourself here despite your mortality, and you're a carp fishing mortal. You're one of us, perhaps. But we had Richie McDonald and Pete Springate in recently, and they name checked you among maybe one of only three people that they felt were really important in shaping carp fishing. So, it's not for you to say, I guess you wouldn't dare sort of be as immodest as to accept that. But from, I feel confident to say that, certainly for me, they're not wrong. I do want to talk a little bit, Tim, about your process with the book, and also a little bit about the fact that you've publicly said it's your last. How does it feel when you've been prolific, I would say, in terms of, I can't think there's too many carp anglers who've written more books than you. How did you come to the conclusion that this might be your last book?
At my age.
But how did that feel?
How did that feel? A relief, really, because putting together a book of that magnitude, meaning size-wise, is stressful because there are 900 illustrations in that book, some of which I've had to commission. You're going back. I would give the advice to anyone whose offspring show any inclination towards anything, give them a camera. From the word go, the first thing you do is give them a camera to record everything that happens in their life. Because when you try and go back, a lot of this is, how on earth did that happen? And a lot of it happened, because of something that happened when I was about 5, when I saw something being caught from a neighbour's pond in the village. And the impression, and it was a muddy little pond in the garden, and these gorgeous silvery creatures appearing as if by magic from this environment, obviously had a big influence on me. I'm not going to go through the full book, but just to set the picture about how it happened. And looking back, I thought it was just buried deep within me, but it wasn't, because we had a big garden at home we were not DIY people, which is an understatement, very seriously not DIY people. But I must have gone on about this, and I'm going back to the war years now, the Second World War, going back to then. And there was a pond dug in the garden, which must have been by my elder brother and my dad, heaven forbid. And they dug this pond and concreted it and filled it with water. And we're going back to the days before pond liners and whatever. And it drained. Concrete does not hold water. And that was the end of the story. That was the end of that pond, which was more typical of us not being. But all I'm saying is those first few fish, and there were no anglers in the family, those first few fish must have had a bigger impact than I thought. So that's why I've gone back to the beginning to trace how on earth I arrived at where I am now, whatever that is. But you say that, yes, I was huge in the start of the Carp Society. Yes, I started the first newsstand, Carp magazine, great. I became a prolific writer because in my head I was always a writer, but nothing inspired me enough. I mean, I'd written 1.5 novels, which were turned down. Very difficult. You know, we're grateful for anyone who publishes books, you know, particularly in the world of carp fishing, which Wayne Cryer has published this book, Great Owen, because it's a risky business, publishing books. You know, so this has arrived at trying to trace how it happened and pay tribute to all the people who made it happen. My heroes, to me, I'm always forever, and it's not over modest, always in the shadow of these heroes. Fred Wilton, Rod Hutchinson, Lenny Middleton, in particular, are the big three. Fred with his nutrition thesis, Rod with his attraction. You know, then you've got to marry the two, what's going on there. Because the minute I heard some amino acids attract carp need protein, you go, wait a minute, amino acids are the main ingredients of protein. There's got to be a connection there. And then Lenny Middleton with his bear hooks, you know, I mean, that was the big thing. The hair gets outdated, the rigs change things. But Lenny Middleton's bear hook was huge at the time because up to that, I mean, I remember stiffening paste baits with Weetabix, hurt your hands in the end to get it hard enough to withstand all the little mouths in Snowbury. Then you had to bury the hook in that, cast out these great big hard balls of bait. And I remember one night, and I'm ashamed to admit this, so tired of striking at these things and reeling the bait back in, I went to bed one night in the middle of a run. I thought, I ain't having that again. No, because it just did your head in. So the bear hooks were huge, absolutely huge, which Lenny and Kevin Maddox are given credit for. So they're my heroes. And as far as I'm concerned, everything I've done since has been an extension of that.
And arguably anything that's happened in carp fishing since has been facilitated by those moments, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we work within the sort of, we're on the shoulders of those giants, Tim, but everything else that's in the book is all you. And talk to me a little bit about the process of, you know, you've done it. How many books is it now, Tim? What would this be? Off top of your head?
Embarrassingly, 12, I think.
So 12. Yeah. So 12 times you've sat down and with an idea and you've had to commit to paper.
More than that, because they don't all work out.
How do you do it? And how regimented do you have to be? How does the creative process work? You know, how long does it take? How sort of do you burn the midnight? All of these things. Paint us a picture of the process.
A lot of it is patience, because particularly, you know, a lot of these guys now are contributing to a monthly magazine. You know, that they will write an article and then they write another article. So I think initially it's the holding back of, well, you revisit articles and not embroider them, but refine them and try to. I mean, Carp Amid the Storm was actually largely the first book I wrote. It was the third book I had published, but it started in the 70s and it was going to be an anthology really, because I was reading stuff by other people that spoke to me, and I wanted to publish a collection of these things. Didn't have a publisher for that at the time. Then Crowood came on to me, and so then Carp Season developed because of the inspiration of the Shropshire Meres, the mangrove, Martin Mere, and the people. Daiwa and RHM is this was Matthew Black stuff. You know, I used to write under the name of Matthew Black, which I think goes back to the protest days. I mean, Peter Mohan was a huge influence on me. I should have mentioned it writing-wise, because the CAA, which I joined, we need material from you. So you wrote for Peter Mohan, which was the starting point. But he was very dictatorial. And he was running the world of carp fishing. So the Matthew Black stuff started out as a bit of a protest about that.
Did his dictatorial nature extend to style, Tim? Was he asking you to write a certain way?
No. I mean, it was. I mean, I believe he once received an article, which he was a schoolmaster. I'm told he once received an article which he corrected and sent back to whoever submitted it. Now, once you start a monthly magazine, you accept that people haven't got English at their fingertips. My mother was an English teacher. We lived next door to the headmaster. The headmaster who was an English teacher at school. So I've always had some literary ambition, if you like. And I love words. I have a photographic memory for words. I know how to spell a word I haven't even seen for some reason. So once you start a carp fisher, which I was the editor of, which was what started me down the track, and then CoOp World in 1988, which was the year of carp season and carp fishing. So after 3 years on the dole and having no car and whatever, suddenly in 1988 it started to come together. Mary came to work for me in 1989. Late 1988, and without Mary, the CoOp World would not have been the success it was. Very, very remarkable woman. Everyone loved her, Mary. Brilliant, remarkable woman. And she, business-wise, she made CoOp World and Angling Publications the success they were, all of which I have to trace in this book because you have to give that credit. But in terms of what I always say is, if you've got something you need to write, I mean, for instance, Lenny Middleton is no longer with us. I collected the original Lenny Middleton article. Bob Davies took me to meet Lenny. We collected the original article from Lenny Middleton describing the advent of the hare because he felt, whatever people credit is given now, Lenny felt it was his invention. I know that from talking to him. So he wanted to get into print before Carp Fever, before the book came out. And it was a sort of 1,200, 1,500 word thesis or essay with not a full stop in it. So all I'm saying is if you have got something that needs to go into print, write it, whatever your literary ability is, because it is an editor's job to put it into English and give whoever wrote it in the first place. Hemingway is one of the greatest authors of all time, but his English was a bit rough and ready. He was very much in the hands. In fact, I've got one of his books, Death in the Afternoon, which I can't actually believe was edited, the first pages of that. So if you have ambitions to write anything, something meaningful, write it and send it in, because it will be turned into English, if needs be, before it appears in print.
Now, you're or you certainly were, a collector of books, Tim. Does it, as I drove here today, sitting in traffic on the M25, I had cause to think about the fact that your most prolific period, in fact, the whole of your writing career overlapped with what will probably end up being the most fertile period for literature within carp fishing. It isn't the same now, Tim, is it?
No. Not because it's all been said, because it's more difficult to get a book published.
Absolutely, no, that's my point. Yeah. My point is that the world seems to have changed.
Well, I think at one time I totted up the number of books that had been published in a 2-year period, and I haven't got this stat in front of me because I didn't know this question was coming. But I think in 1988 or maybe 1989 and 91, which was like Malin's prolific period, I think there was something like 26 books, carp books published. Up to that time, I think there'd been half that number. So this is the prolific period you were talking about. And to some extent, it's continued. That there are great books come out. I love the work of these guys. They all add something to the literature of carp fishing. But it isn't as easy to get a book published now as it was like.
Presumably because publishers are worried that there's not the appetite, Tim. Otherwise they would publish, wouldn't they?
Oh, it's the internet. It's pure and simple. If people want to learn things. I mean, the big one at one time, the how-to carp magazines. the how-to books, they were huge at one time. It's now all on the internet, and we know from paper publications, they have taken a hammering from the internet, so the risk of publishing books is greater than it was before the internet came into being.
Which is kind of my point, really. I guess I'm saying, as a writer, as someone who felt a calling to commit words to a page, you timed it right.
I timed it right, and I'm ever so grateful to Wayne Cryer for continuing to make this possible, because Wayne did the Rod Hutchinson and Chris Yates legacy book, which to me is the best thing I'll ever do, was just mega. I mean, the Hutchinson tapes are just so outstanding, so excellent. The man's mind, and that is where his mind is shown at its greatest. I mean, you commented before we started that I didn't know that it comes across as being a bit prickly at times, but it was. Rod and I could be prickly with each other, because Rod made you feel stupid inadvertently. You'd ask him a question and the reply would come back and you'd think, yeah, well, I should have thought of that. Okay. But you have to ask some of the questions that sound dumb for Rod to answer, and Rod's mind, and this is the point I'm making. I haven't mentioned how big an influence Gibbonson was, because there was only Jim writing anything meaningful in terms of taking up carp fishing up to the mid-70s, because none of the others wanted to give any secrets away. So Jim was in the hotbed of Kent, was telling you what was going on in Kent, which, I mean, my linked ledger and my first knot came from Jim Gibbonson. So he was Hutchinson, Yates, and Fred Wilton and Gibbonson were my first huge influence. Jim isn't very well now, bless him, so he suddenly ceased writing 4 or 5 years ago. But he was a regular in Carp World, huge contributor to the world of carp fishing. I think he was the first to have a book published in each of 5 decades, because his first was in the 60s, his first carp, each of it, and a big contributor. But like we said before we started, some of these people just get forgotten. So part of my literary ambition now is to ensure that they don't get forgotten, because they've contributed far more than some of these kids you see on the internet, and I'm not going to name any names, who talk as though they invented carp fishing. No, they didn't. No, they've refined it, and taken into account the pressure that's gone before, because that's where you have to keep ahead of the carp's thinking. What have they been pressurised before? So, yeah, genuinely, these are influences that I am passing on and trying to make the point how important they were to carp fishing.
And it seems like yesterday that Rod was still with us, albeit it must be 5 years or something by now, Tim. In order to ensure that his, rightful legacy burns bright, can you give us a little insight into the workings of his mind? Because this was like a rock star. The people that I speak to, he's the only rock star carp angler we've ever had who lived that lifestyle, who had that kind of gravitas.
And he looked like a rock star. And he was a rock star in his brother's band at one time. I mean, some of the stuff that's, the chapter in Carp Along the Way, Volume 2, about the last gig they ever did, is one of the most remarkable pieces of writing of any sort I've ever read. He just takes you there, and he would, like Yatesy, he would move out of the box at times, and Rod did, but his mind, particularly in terms, how many of the current scene have actually invented flavours? And a lot of the flavours that you see now, the big ones, were Rod's originally. He sold out to Kevin Nash in the late 80s, so couldn't continue to use some of those names. But when you read his thinking behind the compiling of those flavours with the flavourists, what it was based on in nature and the amino acids, he went to university for a while and stayed with Kevin Nash while he went to Cambridge University to attend lectures about amino acids. And you look at Rod Hutchinson's carp book from 1980, his chapter about amino acids, which were hugely influential on me, because that was the first time I saw in print that carp were attracted by something insoluble. An amino acid is insoluble. And that set me down the track that led to the bait book eventually. Because in the end, many, many years down the line, I found this word messengers. And you just go, yeah, okay. After 30 years of research, there is the important word, messengers. These amino acids that turned carp on, turned carp on, were messengers, and that was the end of the line for me, because someone had finally used this word messengers. So these amino acids, these free amino acids, which wasn't what the carp were after, they were getting the message that here is food you want. And if it wasn't the food they wanted, then it blew. It had to be the food they wanted, which was like the protein thing that Fred came in with.
I'd like to talk a bit more about that, because it's something that's that has been left. We all use bait that someone else makes now, really, and it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine. Where is the knowledge? How is the knowledge being retained and recycled and actually pushed forward? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe I'll ask you in a minute. But one thing I did want to say before we do that, Tim, is it always felt to me like you, in fact, I think you've written about how you hurt your head researching this stuff. Would it be fair to say that Rod had an effortless grasp of these things? Because it felt like it was a more casual thing for him to just trot out these truths about bait.
No, it wouldn't be fair to say that, no. Because the big difference that Rod and I had was this insolubility business, which I grasped that.
Rod felt they needed soluble elements.
Yeah. Right. He always talked about leaching out.
He's still talked about now, Tim, as a huge thing.
Yeah, well, that's right. And this was the part that hurt my head. How can that be? There's something insoluble that is attracting carp, and that was what I had to learn about water, hydrogen bonding, and all this. Now, I was a duffer at science at school. I was a duffer at, no, not quite. I had no powers of retention at school, looking back. My memory has got better with the years, which we might come back to, the reason for that. But I had no powers of retention at school, so a lot of it was in one ear and out the other. And I hadn't got so science was a struggle for me. So when I really wanted to go into the science of what was the basis of this attraction, in science, what was it? How did carp find the food? Because what they are eating isn't soluble, is it? Bloodworms ain't insoluble. There's something going on whereby, apart from the fact that it's live, whereby. So this was what drove me on, trying to explain to myself, and then try and explain in print what this insolubility was about, which is hydrogen bonding, which is the hydrogen factor is the basis. I mean, we walk out in the morning, on a dewy morning, and you can smell the roses, before the traffic fumes get up and the rest of it. You walk out first thing in the morning, and some of the garden smells overpower you. Well, they're insoluble. I mean, they might decay, but they are insoluble. The smell of roses, you're smelling something whole. And that was just trying to grasp that basis of that. Okay. The chemical basis of attraction.
Now, one thing that I think it's key for this kind of a podcast to endeavour to do is to perhaps make that relevant, Tim, because most people use baits that are made by other people now. First of all, is that a risky process to devolve all of your faith in a bait to someone else, something you have done with Mainline and others over the years? And secondly, if someone is interested in bait, what are the sort of real world benefits of knowing that there are insoluble elements that carp find attractive?
Partly in that I'm not a great one for soaking baits. Just to me, the bait becomes more attractive the longer it's in the water, up to a certain limit. To me, it's like a battery running down a bait. So the longer it interacts with the water, the stronger the attraction may get. Is it dangerous to give everything away? No, because bait companies have to be competitive. So whatever they are selling to the public is probably 50% of what they know about carp baits.
It always staggered me, though, Tim, that you were a pioneer in terms of carp attraction, things that attract carp, should I say. Yet you were happy to let Kev make bait for you. And Kev makes a fantastic bait. I'm sure you wouldn't have used anything you didn't have that faith in, but why not continue to make bait yourself?
Because it's much easier to ring someone up and say, I need a freezer of bait, fella, can you send it me? And no, can I just correct you on one thing?
Of course.
I wouldn't consider myself to be great on attraction. I would bow my head to Kev and others on picking up that. What I was maybe a pioneer of was digestibility. Because I took on board what Fred was saying, and I know from talking to Fred, they experimented with enzymes. He showed me a goldfish in a bowl when I went to see him, 82, I think it was. And he fed this goldfish with enzymes, or food laced with enzyme. He never published out any of this because he felt it might have been dangerous. And I hope I'm not misquoting him here, because I went right to him with Bob Morris. And in the end, he had to break the goldfish bowl to get the goldfish out and put it into something bigger. It's that typical shape. So when Bill and I started NutriBaits, and I'd already been experimenting with enzymes, my biggest discovery, because in those days, you haunted health shops, this protein thing. And I came across a protein health food with trypsin in it. Trypsin being one of the main protein enzymes. And I quote the case in this. When we took over, I'm jumping a bit here. When we took over Birch Grove, the mangrove in Birch Grove for the running of, the carp in Birch Grove had been fed peanuts. This is 1988.
Been a day ticket, Tim, hadn't it? At that
been
point,
a day ticket, yeah. And they'd been fed. But then a guy took it on for himself for 3 years. And he had it privately to himself from the Northwest. Guy from the Northwest, Tony Murta. Peanuts were the main bait. And when we took it on, these carp, and there's an illustration in the book of a carp on the back end of the peanut thing. And then after 2 years of the enzyme protein bait. And when we took it on in 88, I get confused with the dates now, 88, 89, they'd been fed, there was 120 in the water that we know about heavily stocked day ticket water. Like 4 years later, there were numerous 30s in there and 20s. And this was because that first bait that we used, which was the forerunner of High New Val, was enzyme-based, which was convertible. So I had this big thing about convertibility. So when Mainline came along, now you think of Activate.
Great bait.
Yeah, but you think of the implications about active. Why active, Because there's some sort of convertibility in it. And that was why, A, it was nice to get a bait that I didn't know anything about, but B, I liked what Mainline were doing with baits. I mean, you've now got pre-digested fish meals and God knows what, but this was the forerunner to me of the easy conversion of baits, which is why the Grange was huge. The Grange as a winter bait, to me, there was nothing else like it. And the mangrove winter of 94 that I had on the Grange, 39 carp through a mangrove winter, couldn't happen. No, that really could not happen.
Tim, me and my friend, like 16 years old, rolling up 8mm Grange on a tiny little garden table off the back of your writings from that. So I've got you to thank for the hours in the shed for the production of one tiny bag of 8mm.
Well, I was lucky because Kevin out was willing to make 8mm.
I bet he wouldn't do that nowadays.
No. Oh, well, he's always cursed me. I was the first one to get him to put Robin Red in a bait, which he cursed me because I'll have to clean the machines afterwards. But funnily enough, that was for the Reduta trip when I caught the biggest carp caught in the year that year on Grange Red. That was the forerunner of Grange Red. So this is the pre-digested element that came into baits from the 80s onwards. So I will take some credit for that. Not attraction. Rod and the others were so great on attraction. But what I will say about attraction is, to me, going back to the messengers, it is the nearest thing you can get to the natural messengers. The nearer you can get to that, the carp are thinking it is something they've been eating for 1 million years or whatever, Okay. So they're quickly onto something. If it then doesn't fulfill or is overlaced with the attractor, then it might blow. Then it might fade away. But I mean, I just read a column I'm doing for Carpology now, Mike Winston, with one of his baits, which he started in 2003, which is still going strong. So baits have now got a much longer life. You all remember the days when a flavour would last for a year and then you have to change the flavour and whatever. The baits that people make now. So no, I could give anything away in print that I might have stumbled across. And someone's going to improve upon it. Someone's going to make it more available.
Do you think, this is the thing that I don't know, Tim, is whether people are picking up your research and going in a bait company and pursuing those avenues, or whether they're just putting together tried and tested recipes that, frankly, haven't moved on for a long time.
Well, Gary Bays worked with Rod Hutchinson, didn't he, for many years, at Kevin Nash. Gary Bays knows all this.
Absolutely.
Kevin Knight, they've got connections in the food industry. they are more familiar with what is going on in the food industry than I am now. And I know that they've got the field testers, they've got the scientists, all researching, because it's a competitive world. They've all got to make a living. They've all got to try and keep one step ahead of another bait company. So now I am just on the phone to Kev Knight. Bless him, Kev, I've just done it now for me rainbow bait. Kev, I need 60 mils of bait. Yeah, all right, Tim. And because you give them the support, and I've always been big with Bill Cotton because of NutriBait and Kev Knight. So I'm very loyal to them. You know, they have been huge to me, and you give them credit. And they know what's going on in the food industry and what works with carp, which I don't now. I am now dependent on them. If I help them at one stage, great.
Can you delineate for people the difference between nutrition and digestion, aside from attraction, as two different things? And it sounds like you're heavily interested by nutritional availability within a boilie.
Absolutely.
And what are the implications for that in terms of a long-term project as opposed to just getting a bite?
Yeah, long-term. You know, you want something that will feed on. And it depends what sort of fishing you're doing. You know, if you've got one night a week and you're going to a local pressured water, you've got to try and keep one step ahead of everyone in terms of attraction, because that might be all you need for that one night a week. If you've got a local water, and I think the big difference between now and the mid-'80s is that I would say that the majority of the leading successful carp anglers use what I would call long-term baits. You know, Rod and I used to talk about this, or I've debated with people. Because it's high attraction doesn't mean to say it isn't long-term, but you can overlace the bait. It's like I can't eat some of the Indian spiced food. You know, it smells great, but I can't eat it. I can only eat fish and chicken. Now, your enzymes start to get tired as you get older. You know, I've talked about with people, these big old uncatchable commons might only be living on live food, because Fred used to say the most convertible thing for carp is carp. You know, because the amino acid profile is there. So a lot of these big old commons, uncatchable commons, okay, try dead bait or try live bait, because that might be what they are now living on. Okay,
so the pre-digested stuff that we now see used a lot, Tim, how does that interplay work with the gut enzymes of a carp, which presumably there aren't too many of? I don't know. There can't be that many.
They've no stomach, so they can't cope with steak, because you know we need trypsin and pepsin and whatever to dissolve steak, to put an expression on it, to convert it to nutrition. You know, you're not eating nutrition, you're eating something nutritional, but nutritional means you can convert it, because unless it goes into your system, it's absorbed by your system, it isn't nutritional. If you eat something that goes straight through you, you know, it might grab a bit out of what you're eating. So the carp has no stomach. So it's through the gut fairly briefly. So they have got to take everything out that they need nutritionally for that period that the bait goes through them.
Which can be very short time, can't it?
Which can be very short time, yeah. Which was what attracted me to the enzyme element in the first place.
So you're giving them a hand in a way. You're starting the process already.
A big hand, yeah.
And does solubility tie in with that as well, Tim? Because obviously we've kind of dismissed solubility in a way. I feel like we have.
No, because short-term solubility might be the big thing.
So something like green lip mussel, for instance, very, very soluble. Apparently, you know, again, I'm an inexpert on bait, but
the solubility in that instance might help the nutritional element. You know, as it goes through, what they can take out nutritionally. When I'm talking about solubility, Hutch used to talk about flavour leaching out. Some of the strawberries are so instant. You know that, but they must be similar to the natural
used anymore,
food.
Tim, does it? Strawberry?
Probably. No one's going to tell you what they use anymore. Strawberry was huge. Anything of that low pH, 2.3. You know, the contrast between that and it's in the bait book. You know, and we're wandering really into a realm. Yeah, wandering into a realm that we could do 3 podcasts about.
We could, and let me point listeners to your. You know, I think, was it 2 or 3 years now the bait book's been out, Tim?
Yes, yeah.
So if you want to hurt your heads and have an understanding of bait like Tim, then that's a good place to start, right? Because you presume you've drawn together a lot of the things that have helped you over the years.
Well, hugely. And Kev Knight wrote for that. I used some of Hutch's stuff in that because it was tracing where it came from. But the final thing that triggered doing the bait book was finding this word messengers. That was the huge thing. So the hydrogen bonding from these 5 amino acids that was so significant to carp was because they were at the end of the protein chain.
I can't resist going back in, so I'm really sorry. I keep meaning to go. But the messengers, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Are these things that have a receptor site in the olfactory system of a carp? Is that
absolutely?
How? Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a very key. Generally, these receptor sites are extremely specific shape, aren't they? To sort of filter out anything else in the environment.
What triggered it eventually? If you just want to spend another 5 minutes on this.
I'm really sorry if people don't like bait.
No, but this is intriguing. This part has really intrigued me because the attractive amino acids had to be lever rotatory. There was lever rotatory and dextro rotatory.
So, is this a 3D shape that you're talking about?
It's a corkscrough shape, lever rotatory. So the fact that they were insoluble and lever rotatory, they were the 2 big intangibles. So for a long time, I took lever rotatory for granted. I had to be lever rotatory. Okay. In the end, you think, well, wait a minute, I'm missing something. Why? Why lever rotatory? So then in the end, I'm thinking, I wonder if the DNA molecule is lever rotatory. Because you see, the DNA molecule, that is miraculous. This, you might have rabbit for dinner or fish for dinner. You don't grow scales, do you? You don't grow long ears.
It's that conversion again. We're back to
the DNA molecule converts. Every living creature has got the DNA molecule, and whatever they eat is converted to what they are. So we don't start mooing, and we don't grow scales. So in the end, I thought, I wonder if the DNA molecule is lever rotatory. So the big difference now is the internet. In the past, I had to find scientific papers or buy books that would help me along the way. I asked the internet, is the DNA molecule lever rotatory? And it came up with that corkscrew effect that I show on one of the lead chapters for this. So the DNA molecule is lever rotatory. So I thought, well, to me, that is the key with these messengers. The messenger is received by the DNA molecule in every living creature, which gets the message to convert that to whatever it needs to convert it to dog, or convert it to cat, or convert it to human being, or convert it to fish. And we just take all that for granted. But it's so miraculous that it was suddenly a simple explanation of what went before. Because it had to be lever rotatory, because it had to be insoluble, otherwise it disappeared, there would be nothing there to eat. The DNA molecule and the messenger's interaction explained it all. That was the basis of nutrition.
Oh, it's fascinating, actually. When you think about it, it makes perfect sense that a carp would evolve to pick up the things that are insoluble about a bait. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to find it, would they? Because it'd be gone. So, fascinating. Well, like I say, your book is a good starting point for anyone who wants to dive deeper into that. And I hope people do, because, it would move us on a lot quicker if there were more people doing it, I think.
Well, some people will. And someone will take it further, which is why I did it all in. And I cover it partly in here. I had to keep it brief in here, in this book, because there was so much to cover. But yeah, it fascinated me, and I was just thrilled with myself, if you like, that I persevered. And this started in the mid-70s, don't forget. And it took till suddenly, by probably 10 years ago, I came across messengers, which gave me the trigger to do the carp bait and nutritional recognition. Because nowhere in the internet or anywhere else will you find the expression nutritional recognition. I thought this was Fred Wilton's. It wasn't. I was the one, and I'm not boasting there. I just thought it was an established fact of nutritional recognition. But to me, it explains the recognition of what is nutritional.
In terms of contributing to work that is going to last, when I started to develop a small interest in bait, which I hasten to add I haven't maintained, more's the pity, but stuff like Hara were the only stuff you could read, and it was pretty dry, and most of it was irrelevant, wasn't it? So what you've done is synthesized all of the stuff that you've become aware of and put it into it's a small book, Tim, isn't it? It has to be said. So concise.
concise. And can I tell that brief story about horror? Because Terry Eustace, when we first had Birch, and I was introducing bait to Birch, and I could watch fish in Birch, and he said, I've got a couple of guys coming over from America. Do you mind if they join you at Birch to talk about bait? So I was up a tree with this guy at Birch. We were watching the fish on the bait, and he suddenly said, are you familiar with Joshua T. Hart or whatever? I said, oh my God, yeah. The Bibles to me. I said, oh, because I got a chapter in a couple of his books. I thought, what? What on earth are you doing up a tree with me? So I actually got, through this guy, 2 books signed by Hara.
Amazing.
Yeah, and he was the only source at one time to start trying to make scientific sense. And one of these, you see, Rod gave this explanation. If I smell bacon and eggs down, and I go down for breakfast and I get toast, I'll be disappointed. And that was his explanation of the messenger thing and the bait not backing up the message. And in the horror books, they give that exact same explanation of feed on fish farms. If you give them the message and then don't fulfill the message with something nutritional, they will stop eating it, which Rod had given in his and this was a 92 book, I think, that I found that explanation. And that is why I think Rod was so far ahead of his time in terms of where he went with the scientific angle of all that.
So just to recap on what I said, it wasn't as effortless as it looked for Rod. Was this a lots of perspiration involved in getting to where he got to with these?
He worked very, very. I mean, he went to university and he worked very, very closely with. I've forgotten the name of the guy. I think Barnett and Foster was his first bait company. Worked very, very closely with him in terms of these concepts he'd got of what should work in flavours. And then of course he sold those out to Kev Nash.
Now you touched earlier on what is, I would imagine, a very vivid period. And I think anyone who's watched the Sipography interview that we did, Tim, apologies, but we're going to cover a little bit of ground we did in that. I want to stay mostly away from that. But I am obsessed with this idea that aged, I think, 50, you completely changed your life. To me, that's one of the most inspirational things that I've ever sort of been aware of. It must be, looking back, it must be such a vivid period.
It's a matter of, what I put myself through, because I'd got this. You see, going through the 80s, it was obvious that there was a carp fishing explosion. And Maddox and Moen were still the main force through the early 80s. We started the Carp Society. There was a huge following for Carp Fisher, which was the first coloured carp magazine, which Mike Wilson and Dave Watson were responsible for the design and the layout and production. And because I'd had a couple of articles in print, I was appointed editor, which looking back was the biggest thing that ever happened to me. But then through the 80s, it was growing and growing. And I thought, well, there might be a niche for a carp stand magazine. I'd got ambitions to move south by then because through the Carp Society, I'd seen what was happening in the Colne Valley. And suddenly in 84, by then I'd been introduced to Shropshire. So Snowbury, which was my first sort of national carp water, which wasn't a big fish wood.
In Buckinghamshire?
Buckinghamshire. Yeah, on the A5 at Buckinghamshire, had a huge effect on me because it was timeless. That my first night, I'd just done the odd overnighter sitting under an umbrella. We went down there and I came away and these guys were making breakfast. And they got the houses with them and I knew nothing about that. Because there wasn't, you weren't seeing it in print in those days, any of this. And there was a timelessness about that just grabbed me. I thought, I need that. Went back to whatever I was doing. It wasn't a happy life at that time because I wasn't in a career that, by then I was just working in a factory, to give me time to start carp fishing.
Did you feel unfulfilled? Did you feel like your talents were being wasted there, Tim?
No, I didn't, because I didn't know I got talents. I felt unfulfilled in that life didn't suit me. I wasn't suited to real life. I'll not enlarge on that because, you can hurt people back along the way and you just don't want to do that. So, Philip has said to me, why don't you write a novel? I said, well, your first novel has to be thinly autobiographical. and you don't want to hurt people twice over.
I mean, you allude to a different life in I got you to sign Carp Amid the Storm before we started, Tim. In many ways, this was the very start of things for you, and perhaps you were less guarded. I don't know. I mean, but life bleeds across that.
I was a misfit.
Right.
And I found something I fitted into. As simple as that. And a lot of your readers and viewers and listeners will relate to that.
Well, I think what you identify, Tim, with the Snowberry thing and seeing these people living these lives under canvas is still a huge draw for lots of weekend carp anglers.
Bivvy life. Bivvy life is still the huge attraction to me. All right, great. You're trying to catch carp, and if you go unfulfilled for too long, but you mentioned the fact that you'd had Pete
and Richie, yeah.
Pete Springate. Now, to me, they referred to Pete as Sir Pete, because Pete was the first one that I saw. I interviewed him on the banks of Raisbury for carp fishing. Pete, I interviewed both of them for carp fishing. But Pete was the first one that I saw accepting of blanks. That blanks were part of the currency for where you wanted to get. And I was still in a period where a blank night was a failure. You woke in the morning, oh my God, what was that about? So there is a quantum leap from carp fishing to fishing for big carp. There's a huge quantum leap, a reluctance acceptance of blanks. But you have to accept that they are part of the currency of fishing for big carp, because in the end, you're trying to avoid that run of night, or because the big carp might be. I remember one of Rod's great stories about lying on his stomach, watching carp feeding with a big carp circling to weigh up the dangers. So I always remember that. I don't think I've ever seen that in print. He suddenly found a pair of feet next to him after he's been lying on his stomach for 2 hours watching this big carp circling. Suddenly found a pair of feet standing next to him, and he chased him off the lake. So yeah, you can imagine. So that sticks with you. That again, going back to Rod, the first show I ever saw him do was at Manchester Carp Society show, and I'm just translating this into the time span of things. And he was saying, you remember that when you've got a bait out there, and he was talking about day ticket, he said that carp might have passed over that hook bait 6 or 7 times during the day before his defences are broken down and he'll have a go at it. Now the minute you start on Rainbow and the big waters, you translate that to days. It might be 3 or 4 days. Now, why you have to have a bait in position for 4 days at Rainbow, I don't know. I can't put a full explanation on that, unless it is part of the absorbing of the water and the carp, the bait becoming part of the environment, or whether it is, okay, it's been there for 4 days, it must be safe. I don't know. Or whether you're waiting for it to feed over 4 days. I can't put an explanation on that, but I know it happens, and I know you've only got to read anything about Rainbow. It came after it'd been out 7 days. Now, that is unbelievable, that you've got to sit on your hands at Rainbow and wait. So it is a different, and I always had this battle with Jacko, not battle, but conflict of approach, because we fished the World Carp Classic together on numerous occasions, and Jacko, Lee Jackson, brilliant angler, but he was accustomed to overnight fishing, so if it had been out there overnight, think it out again. Where I'm been out there 3 days, I might have to change it reluctantly. I might have to change it, because you imagine to me on a 2,500 acre water, it might be 4 days but even find your bait. So the longer it's been in place, then the more likely they are to accept it, that it's there. So there was that difference in mental approach between the overnight approach and the long session big water approach. You learn to sit on your hands. That it might be 3 or 4 days or whatever, however long you're there. So there is that difference in approach, and that is one of the big things, So watching Sir Pete in action at Raisbury and it never occurred to me for 1 second that his alarm might sound. Most of the people I interviewed on the bank, you're thinking, go on, and it's so you learn so much from these people down the years, and it's why you just have to pay tribute to them in a book, because they've all been a huge influence on where you finish up in carp fishing.
And in so many ways, Tim, you have been like the biggest avenue that these anglers have had to get their engagement with the public. You know, really, a lot of these guys wouldn't have had the same opportunities had it not been for Carp World, for instance.
Carp fishermen in Carp World,
yeah.
Yes, I accept that. I accept they were an influence. Yeah.
So how did you deal with, because I've sort of been there in my own small way when I first started working on David Hall's magazines, all of a sudden you're privileged, you know, to see to get an insight into the way these guys fish, and by the nature of these things, they nearly always do it differently, Tim. So how did you attempt to assimilate what you were seeing into your own fishing, or did you try and sort of blank it out and just do what you were going to do anyway?
Oh no, you're hugely influenced. Yeah. Again, I'm going to go back to rod. The first time I saw rod fishing was on, it's the Lido, and he'd got an island like 60, 70 yards across from him. You know, it was an easy cast for rod. He was a big caster. And I just said, how are you fishing it, Rod? He said, well, there's a spot halfway across. He said that each time, he says it's a natural spot, natural feeding spot. Each time the carp come through, they'll dip down into that spot to see if there's any natural food available. So, in other words, the natural food isn't all available, but they will have their feeding spots. Now, that was hugely influential on me. Where do the carp feed? You know, that was always my guiding light. Sometimes it's got to be snags, you know, that's the only place you're going to find them. But the minute I went on to the Mears at the start of the 80s, you know, which isn't that long after, and then the mangrove, Martin Mere, is fringed by lily pads. So I think it's changed slightly now, but was fringed by lily pads. They were not bait fish. They did not want to know about a bait just off the lily pads. You had to try and find where they fed naturally. And that huge lesson I learned about that one, the carp head and shouldering, I learned that on the field swim, and I've put that one in print. I had a bed of baits out of the marker float, bed of baits, 3 baits on it or whatever you've got out there. And I'm sitting there and I was always a huge watcher of the water. And I'm watching one night, and a fish head and shoulders like 20 yards to the right of the bed of baits. And here we go. I've got fish in the area. Nothing happened. Next night, same thing, and in the same spot. So I move one rod. Nothing happened up to dark. Put it back on the bed of baits. Now the third night, same thing. I thought, whoa, wait a minute. And I moved one rod and I put it there, and I had 3 fish on that rod that night. So to me, that was, I feed here. That head and shoulder bit, either I'm feeding or I feed here. And all my successes, or most of my successes, until they became bait fish on the mangrove, then you could catch them off the pads and in the edge. But that one comment of Rod's, where do they feed? You know, that is huge, absolutely huge.
I love the fact, Tim, that you are, you know, you've clearly been very receptive to these click moments, to these moments where and things go in.
Yeah, and stay in.
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk about rigs if you want a bit.
Yeah.
Because I use the 360 rig. Mm-hmm. Now, you've got to learn, if you're going to use the 360 rig, 2 points. A, is it permitted on your water? B, do not try to pick up a landing net with a fish in it with the 360 rig. You have to reach in and untangle it. But I'll not mention who the 360 rig came from. 2 very, very successful anglers. If it was good enough for them, it is certainly good enough for me. And I passed it on to Ellis Brazier, who was a great natural angler, all-round angler, huge. You should have Ellis Brazier on here sometime, because he's even got his skipper's license because of his love of deep sea fishing, and he runs a carp water, and he's a watcher of fish, and he is brilliant. And he said to me once, "What's your rig, Tim?" And I said, "Well, it's this 360 rig." He said, "What's that?" And I showed him. Anyway, he would catch carp anyway, Ellis. But like a year later, because I'm across at Birch shortly for the start, and I said, "So what are you catching on then, Ellis?" He said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "I watched him on that 360 rig with a PVA bag." He said, "Without the 360 rig, you're talking about, even with a PVA bag, you're talking about 1 pickup in 20 attempts." Mm-hmm. He says, "With the 360, you're talking about 1 pickup in 5. You know, so in other words, they go in there, they eject, and sooner or later they slip up, you know. So your chances were so much increased with the 360 rig, and it's such a good hooker. You know, you learn so much from Rainbow, trying to hook big fish about snags. I'll let him run a bit. And there's none of that on some of those swims. Hook it, walk back, and it might be 80 pounds, so all the tackle has to be up to it, and the hook hold certainly has to be. So I've always been big on rigs. I don't the dual rig, which I used a stiff rig with 1.5 inches of flexible at the end, and the sliding hair with it on the.
I remember you having some quite interesting exchanges with Nashi about the blowback, which I think he thought was very much his territory, didn't he?
No, because that was a misunderstanding.
Right.
I think we had a brief falling out about that. But what Nashi was saying, which I didn't understand at the time, and I still don't know how valid it was that when he's talking about sucking and blowing, he's actually talking about them pricking themselves, then sucking the hook out, which I didn't understand fully when he first moved it. I thought, we all know they suck and blow, suck and blow. No, what he was saying was that when a carp, when you see the old fins going agitated and it's got the bait in the mouth and you're not sure, it's then sucking to try and suck the hook out. I still don't know how valid that is, that we had that bit of a fallout because I misunderstood what you were. And he just talked down to you at times, Nasha, which is fair enough because he's very knowledgeable and very successful.
But your rig at the time, I don't know if you use it anymore, Tim, but was it the Amnesia with a bit of silkworm and a long shank hook?
Yeah, and still the best rig I've ever used.
Really?
And I can't be out. Well, no, why I changed was because at the time I went to Rainbow, I couldn't find the ingredients strong enough to cope with the situations that I was fishing. I could now, and I might change to that this time around when I go this time around, because that was a brilliant rig. And when I started at Richardson in 2001, when I first went, I started on a straightforward. See, I took a I had an edge to me for 2 or 3 years because I believe wherever you went, you had to have a nutritional bait. And I thought that big carp recognised that very, very quickly. So I think that was my edge at Cassian and Reduta, which they were both very, very kind to me, hugely kind to me, those waters. Kinder than anyone has been since. Although Redmar, I did all right at Redmar. So they were very, very kind to me. But I took very, very good bait to Reduta. And I took very, very good bait to Cassian and spread it all over the place. Get them on it. Then try and find where they'll pick it up. What
kind of quantities, Tim, would you happily introduce when you were in the mindset, let's get them on it?
Over a very big area. It was this approach of what I call area baiting and dinner plates. I want them, for instance, the Cassian result that I had.
Which is on the front of your book here. The moon scale, is it that one?
That's the half moon scale.
Half moon scale, yeah.
Half moon scale, yeah. Yeah, from that epic day when Briggsy and Briggsy was, we'll come to Briggsy, the influences. Because when I was going to fish the World Cup at Fisherville in 2000, my 3 best friends then were Hughesy and Crowe, who were fishing as a pair. And Briggsy was there was this great triumvirate of these guys coming through. Very, very successful. All 3 of them. Rang Briggsy. Best thing I ever did. Really, do you fancy fishing in this World Cup at Fisherville? Yeah, great, okay. And we won it. Great. First of the 3. And then, why have you never fished Cassian? This was from Briggsy. Well, I never... To me, they were territories other people fished. There are periods when you have to move severely out of your comfort zone to progress, if you like, if that's the right word in carp fishing. You have to go out of your comfort zone. So to go to Cassian, which is a huge leap out of your comfort zone, with someone like Briggsy, who had been going since the 80s and loved the place, and had this starting point of 25 feet, I've never known anyone like it for depths, depth being so crucial. So we went to Cassian. He caught a couple. We moved after 3 days, and the water level had just dropped enough for us to get onto the bridge swim. It just dropped. So we were lucky, otherwise there would have been someone there. Briggs had enough of that after one night. And he felt responsible for me. I said, no, I'm fine. I love it. This will do for me. When Briggsy moved, I went back to where all the baits were in the freezer. And that was trigger. That was the trigger result. Again, trigger, you see, this trigger thing. To me, there's an implication of enzyme active conversion in there. So I went back and got another 10 pounds or 10 or whatever of trigger and spread it over. See, that bridge swim, there's like this huge mound in the middle. and then there's a channel either side, and this huge jet mound in the middle, which goes from 40 feet up to 12 feet.
Wow.
Which is where Briggs's knowledge of two things about that. Simon Horton had mentioned ages before how significant Potter-McGeaton is in France, because their Potter-McGeaton is different to ours. And he said it's the home of bloodworms. The French carp love Potter-McGeaton because they will go and look for bloodworms there. So if you're getting a swim with Potter-McGeaton in it, you have a bait there. And that was one of the things that kept me on the bridge swim. I had Canadian pondweed and Potter-McGeaton just down to my left. So that was the starting point, margin bait there. And I finished up with baits then at 40 feet, 25 feet, which was Briggs's banker, and 12 feet, which was the top of the plateau up by the bridge. So that area, when it went dark, and I did a lot of things in the dark so people didn't know what I was doing. When it went dark, I went and spread 10 pounds of bait over both sides, both channels, the one I wasn't fishing and there wasn't one. So anything passing through would find my bait, then narrow it down to the dinner plates of hemp and chop baits and whatever, to get them, take their mind off the hook bait. In other words, try and keep them in the area with the bait, which is still my approach. Spread it all over the place, baits all over. Don't try and narrow down. Then try and find what looked like feeding spots. Like the 40-foot spot that produced 2 carp on that electrifying day, 40 feet, was just one little spot among the tree stumps that was sort of a foot deeper than anywhere else. So is that a carp feeding spot? I think. Anyway, I put a hook bait there. I found a brilliant spot at 25 feet with weed all round it, which I never found again, funny enough. One at the top and one alongside the Potter-McGeaton bed. And that day when Briggs and I caught a 20, a 30, a 40, a 50 and a 60 between us on that one electrifying day, it started at 40 feet in the morning. I'd had one in the early hours from the Potter-McGeaton bed, at maybe 12 feet, I think now. Briggs had come and photographed 3 fish for me, and he was in bottom of the North Arm by that time. Went back and had his 50. And he'd been and photographed, and I was just sitting taking. So we're at 11 o'clock. So we've got to 11 o'clock in the morning. I'd got this, because I'd put all the baits back out. Beep. What's that about? Then it slowly tightened. Oh,
best kind of runs, aren't they?
Feeding's over to me.
Right.
And it's that on the end. Such a huge, huge battle. And I'd had a 59 from Domaine de Beau, the previous, which was like my way out of my league. I went there to try and catch a 40. And my first fish over 40 was 59.2. So, and there was a Frenchman or 2 Frenchmen saw me battling with this fish.
Did you take to the boat, Tim?
No, I didn't have to. No. It started to go. I went towards the box. It was going up towards the bridge. Changed its mind. And you have to lean on these things. You have to frighten yourself a bit when you're playing fish at this time. Swung around to the right. And the Frenchman saw me, and he just got down in the swim when I landed it. And I looked at this thing. I thought, oh my God, looked at that thing. And he looked at it and says, oh, this is half moon scale. This is the fish or I might have said moon scale. This is the fish all the English want to catch. I thought, oh, is it? Oh, look at him. And he weighed it for me. And he weighed it for me. And he said, I forget what it is in kilo, 26 kilo. And I remembered that the Domaine de Beau fish was a similar sort of one. I'm looking at it thinking, that could be a 50. But then when he said the weight, I thought, oh yes, that is 63 pounds. I thought, oh my God, it's what? So I went to phone, rang Briggsy, who's gone back, there's no answer. And he's rowing towards me. When I jumped to he's right there, you can't have heard already. What's that about? So he came back. How do you feel about coming to photograph this 50 I've got in the sack? Then I thought, oh God, how can I tell him this? He's been to photograph 3 fish from me. Love to, Briggsy. Well done, mate. Well done. Have you heard of a fish called moon scale? Of course I have. I don't think he said it's the one. Of course I have. He said biggest fish. Maybe not. No, there was a bigger. He said something to the effect that he knew all about it. I said, I've got it in my sack. So we had his 50 to photograph at that, and it was, to me, it was just the area baiting and dinner plates, which was, I'd made mistakes before that. When I went back back to the where the World Carp Classic Medine. And Lee and Hugendijk had a big result from Medine. And you've got this in your mind. So I went to Medine with Marsh Prattley, God rest his soul, one of the sessions. I'd fished with Crowley there, I'd fished with Rob Hughes there. And I went and I got this result in my mind. And I went out and just spread about 10 kilos of bait or whatever and put that. And then going back, you think, what was that about? No. That was all right if a shoal of 40s came in. Ain't going to work if one came in. Mm-hmm. So that would, you learn from mistakes. You pay some bitter prices down the way. So that was when it was refined to the big area baiting. Anywhere in front of you, try and pull them and try and hold them, and then try and narrow them down to the hook bait.
So in this bridge swim, you're content to, I mean, that's not a lot, 10 pounds of bait. And do you think they're aware of...
All over the place.
Do you think they're aware of that as a single thing, as being an area of food, or are they just...
Here's another one.
Right.
That became my approach.
Yep.
That's another one, which when we come to the wafters, when I changed to 22 mil baits, which I did, the heavier the free offerings are, the more effective the wafter is, if that makes. And it's not critical. I don't do critical balancing. As long as it's substantially lighter.
Are you looking for it to fly back as far into the mouth cavity as possible?
As far as it can. It's just, here's another one. Oh my God, I've got a problem here. And the further it goes back, I think the bigger the problem is.
Okay.
Because, keeping the coated hook link stiff. And I've watched slideshows by a lot of them. I'm influenced by all of them. Mm-hmm. Darryl Peck, to me, is the most effective slideshow I've ever seen. And I've got all the time in the world for the guy because he's gone in at the sharp end. A lot of these guys are bounty hunters, if you like, as Rob Malin used to call it. Target the fish from that water. Mm-hmm. Great. But to go out of your depth, which Darryl has done on numerous occasions and succeed, he paid a high price at the Orient for it, but he succeeded, as Andy Chambers did on the Orient, and people talk about the best carp angler or whatever. I mean, I've put in the latest carpology column. They talk down a bit about overseas fishing, but it's a question of what you think is the significance, isn't it? Do you think the British Athletics Championships are more significant than the Olympics? Do you think Ben Nevis is more significant than Mount Everest? No, these guys are fishing the Everests of carp fishing. When they go onto these 6,500 acre waters, battling for swims, and limited number of swims on the Orient, limited number of swims on Shandycock, any of these places, they are going out of depth and succeeding. And it is noticed, they are flying the flag for England and Britain when they go and succeed on these waters. Mm-hmm. So power to their elbow, good on them, And Darryl and others, Andy Chambers, Barry Mills, who was part of the Redmar committee at one time, he's done hugely successful. Really? I'm not even sure he's a consultant, and he doesn't write about it. But he's been hugely successful, home and abroad, over 50 years, Barry. Yeah, they're great anglers.
Before we leave that particular chapter, one thing that's noticeable, Tim, is that out of those thousands of photos that you had available, you went for moon scale or half moon scale on the cover. Did you agonise about that? Or was it that far ahead?
I didn't, because this sounds a daft reason, doesn't it? I like the full bleed of a cover. Yeah. And once you get to the full bleed, it's difficult to get portrait-style pictures of big fish. Mm-hmm. Most of them become landscape. So you couldn't do a full bleed of the full cover. And that was the best shot I'd got of a big fish that I could use the full bleed of the cover on, if you follow that.
Yeah, it's disappointingly unromantic, Tim. I was hoping for some kind of...
Well, no, plus I'll marry it to the fact that it's a hugely significant big fish.
No, I know.
Married
It's
to
tongue-in-cheek.
that. In other words, I couldn't get the big common as a landscape shot. Sorry, as a portrait shot on the most significant fish I've ever caught, because it was the biggest fish caught in the world that year.
Amazing.
Was the common from Reduta.
Yeah.
In 2001. And I just mentioned that when we were talking about bait earlier, and I knew that because I'd got waters with commons in them, or was helping or involved in waters with commons in them, the mangrove and birch, there were one or two items that were significant to me. And the Grange was a big common bait, and Robin Red seemed to be significant to comments. And that was why I got Kev Knight to make me Grange Red for the first time. And when we were coming back on the plane, I can't remember who I was sitting next to. He said, "What do you catch the big comment on, Tim?" I said, "Oh, Grange Red. I had it put together because I thought it was a good," and he laughed. Because I said I thought it was a good big comment, but he laughed. He didn't think that made any sense at all. To me it did, and it worked.
One question I need to ask. That plateau you caught the half moon scale off, were you fishing the near edge or the far edge? It's kind of in my mind as you were describing it. I wanted to make just clarify that. Those dinner plates, where did you actually place them in the end?
Well, it had to be my side.
Your side.
Because the other side, you could fish it from the other side, although there wasn't anyone fishing from I think, or maybe you had to be the other side of the bridge to fish. But you didn't want to be over the other side because of the line.
This is a huge feature
over the gravel.
It's not like English fishing where you could fish over a small gravel bar the size of this table over the back.
It was like half a mountain. They call it the plateau, but it was like half a mountain.
Yes.
Yeah. So probably this side.
Topographically, does that take some getting your head round? That you're looking at, effectively you're facing a cliff and you're fishing onto it.
No, you're looking. I'd learned quickly from Briggsy that you're looking for different depths. Because, and as it turned out, different times of the day, and the significance of 40 feet or 8 feet to start with from the pot bed, then 40 feet, 2 from 40 feet, 1 from 25 feet, and then last thing that night from 12 feet. It was the different. Briggsy was huge, and wherever we went, and 1 or 2 other places we went to, he just understood the depth straight away. But he would use the variations. But 25 feet was always his start. I mean, my other big fish, my second very big fish from Cassian, the 57 that I had a couple of sessions later, came from 53 feet. Because you go to Cassian, what depth are they coming from? As deep as you can find. That was the... And I was favouring the South Arm by then, because Lucy the 70 lived in the South Arm, and I was keen to have that fish. And so then you're looking for... And that was like a ravine, the South Arm, with the old stream bed along 53 feet. And that one night I think I had a 35 one night. And then that one night I had a 42 and the 57. Both came from 53 feet, which is just a foreign language to you.
Yes.
Until you go to these places, and you just have to believe in it.
Does it become normalised?
It's never normal, is it, carp fishing?
Tim, it felt a bit like that particular capture, that half moon scale capture. You were at a time in life when you were able to then just achieve like a lift off and go and target some of the biggest carp in the world. Was that actually what happened, or was that just the way it feels?
It was just a follow-on. It was a Briggsy-inspired follow-on, without a doubt. The World Cup, and then immediately, Medine triggered it. Hutchie was the one who triggered Medine, because it was the first World Carp Classic in 1998. Now, what Rod realised, Medine had been a big fish water, very restricted because of the night areas. So Rod figured out that there'd be a draw, and that it would be in areas that weren't normally fished. So Rod, the first Medine World Carp Classic was triggered by Rod, in actual fact. But he'd had enough after one. He didn't get anything like a draw. One of my favourite stories from that, which I used in the book, I was a sort of go-to guy for Rod for certain things. And Mary was certainly a go-to girl for Rod. And she said to me one day prior to the trip, she said, Rod doesn't want to do it in one hit. He's asked me to book overnight accommodation at Coventry before we go across the channel. And I thought, wait a minute, something not making a lot of sense there. So I couldn't figure out. And in the end, a couple of hours later, I got it. I thought, you sure Rod didn't say Canterbury? And she went very quiet. So I never did find out whether we had to change arrangements for Coventry. But that was the start of the big water thing, because, I caught a fish. I got a good draw, actually, that first Medine. But Medine is 2,500 acres. And I thought it would be frightening, but it wasn't. It was thrilling. The fact that there was that added intangible of you might not have a fish within a mile of you added to the dimension of carp fishing, So immediately I loved the big water thing. So that was part of the big fish thing that followed. Domaine de Beau, Etang de Margot had big fish in them. And like you intimated there, I was in a position where I could do it. You know, I'd got a CoOp World to get out each month, which I did all the proofing for at that stage till we got proofreaders in later. So I had to spend 2 weeks a month working. My idea of working, not like going down the mines, was it? My idea of working. But Mary would run the business, and then the girls, when, you know, Pip and Jemima then joined the business. So it gave me the freedom and the income, really, to pursue whatever I wanted to pursue.
And this wasn't an altogether unuseful thing, Tim, as a writer and someone who had to turn out a CoOp leader every month. You know, you're there, you're doing it on the biggest stage in a way, and you're then able to come and write about that.
Well, I think we're sort of sidetracked. I probably sidetracked it earlier. But, you know, I'll just give this quote about, as a writer and doing a succession of books, I'm very influenced by this. You see, Ernest Hemingway, who was of a different era, obviously, but Ernest Hemingway was involved himself in 2 world wars and the Spanish Civil War, and based novels on his experiences from them. You know, we were talking about Darryl Peck earlier. I've got all the time in the world for Darryl. Hemingway said, for a true writer, each book should be a new beginning where he hopes to try for something that is beyond attainment. Now, that beyond attainment, that is what it feels like with the World Cups, with the big 2,500 acre waters, you know, you're fishing. So you're moving out of your comfort zone, and that is where the feeling of beyond attainment comes from. So each new book, you're trying to write about carp fishing as some new dimension, you know, from the bivvy, some more from the bivvy, which was sort of nearly, but then bivvy 3, that I couldn't improve. That was written on the bank as I did it. Couldn't really improve on bivvy 3. Then there was the bait book, and then this, of course, where you're just trying to. You can't say to people. I mean, when I was doing this, I couldn't even remember where some of the things I was referring to, where I'd written about them. I had to go back to other books to try and find out something to and the amount of stuff I'd forgotten. You're
not a diarist then, Tim?
No, not in the slightest, other than the bivvy books. Not in the least. Amazing.
Can I ask, again, sidetracking ourselves, but that's the way we roll here. Are there moments in a life, a long life, that are much more vivid and easier to recall? And if so, are they all part of the same period, or can they be from different parts of your life?
No, and I think I tried to cover that in the foreword, because what seems hugely significant at the time, the significance can change looking back. And I certainly think the people thing changes hugely. The people who have influenced you and the impact following on from that, and occasions. You know, it's like that daft occasion at Gigantica, where Tom Dove suddenly said about these white things, you know, huge significance. At the time, it was just a conversation. You know? So the significance it had, looking back, was massive. And that's true of lots of things, like the little throwaway comment of Rod. There's a carp dips down there to feed, to see if there's anything in his feedings, but bang, that became my guiding light throughout my carp fishing.
Talk to me about the white wafters. We don't want to gloss over that, Tim, really, because it became really significant for you. This is more up to date, isn't it? It has to be said. This was when you had your trips to Gigantica, when it first opened, maybe, or around the time it opened.
Well, I went to Gigantica before Danny had it.
St. Christophe.
Christophe, yeah. And I had, I think my biggest then was 49. Went again in the winter when Danny first had it, we were asked to go, and I had a 57 then, which was a nice result. And then I had a 53 that time. When I had one blank there, I think. I went in, and I wasn't best pleased about that with Korda, because they brought in this no leader thing, you know, which is, and it turned out I was actually fishing, I didn't realise it at the time. They discovered that there were zebra mussels on a snag to my right, and I had one take that week and got cut off. But because I'd not got my normal big fish leader on, I got cut off. You know, so thanks, Dan, for that rule. Otherwise, I think the world of these guys, which I hope we'll come back to. But that particular time, I wasn't best pleased about that. In fact, I still don't understand that rule. You know, Korda makes snag leaders and shock leaders and whatever. So I don't understand that rule, but there you go.
What about the strategic battle at a lake like Gigantica? Was that something you when I read your stuff, Tim, You're a thinker when you're on the bank. You very much like Dan in a sense. You're always thinking about your options, especially when you're stuck in a swim at one lake and you've got to get the best from that swim. Did you enjoy that battle of wits?
Always do. That is carp fishing to me, and it's, I mean, you get that hugely from the matches, and we've won 3 world championships because I've had great partners and we've been able to figure out, I mean, we didn't win a lot of World Carp Classics, we got beaten up there, good style, Jacko and I, over the years. But then I often feel I'm better with a draw than trying to pick a swim for myself, because you put there, try and catch something, And I admire the guys who've only got Friday night and are working, and I hope that comes across from my writing, because they're getting to lakes where there's no way they're going to get in the best swims or whatever, and they've got to try and succeed from that.
I get that from your writing, and a lot of the early stuff, the stuff like Carp Season, Carp Amid the Storm, when you were traveling to those southern big fish venues and you were seeing the people, you were describing what you found on these fertile big fish grounds, the likes of Bob Davis, Alan Smith, Mark Summers, on Darrent or Richie, there would have been, I loved the way that you painted, you brought to life these characters, and they were clearly as important as the fishing.
Alan Smith was huge, taken from us far too early because they didn't diagnose his prostate cancer properly early enough, and he rang me, Alan Smith. I can picture it now, standing in the kitchen at Rood Lane, the house before where I live now. Sounded right as anything. And Mickey Sly, his best mate, rang me next day to say Alan's gone. And that just amazed me, because he was ringing to say goodbye, and I didn't realise it at the time. Terrific company, Alan Smith, very influential. I mean, tell the story in there. They came up to Birch Grove because he was a big Darren angler, and the other Kent waters, for people who aren't aware of the name, Alan Smith. Came up to Birch Grove to fish. He was going to fish with Fletch and Mickey Sly. And I was on the mangrove, and I went up to meet them, have a coffee before they went on, and it was... And I think we started having coffees about 8 o'clock in the morning. And Smithy said, doesn't look very difficult to me. I better have a fish before midday. He claimed he was going to have a fish before midday. Yeah, all right, Alan. Yeah, okay. You'll soon get your come up and see us, son. The usual banter.
Yeah, it's hard up north. Right? Yeah.
So eventually, after the coffees and that, they went out to the swims about 11:15. Before midday, he'd had the biggest fish in the lake, Smithy.
What did he do? How was he able to do that, right?
I mean, always great on baits, ground up kitty cat or whatever. Not kitty cat, gull cat. I think that was his big one. So, he believed in Fred's nutrition, but he felt he had the whole thing in pet foods. And but running leads was his big thing. And I fished running leads for quite a while under his influence. And because... they get accustomed to feeling for that resistance, and it isn't there or after a while. It's that different feel. It's something different. I
mean, is that really pertinent to anglers of today? Because I would imagine that it's a vanishingly small number of people who actually use running leads now.
Huge. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose you could argue that the chod rig, there's no, depending on what way they move initially, there's no fixed point of pressure, but most of the time it's a bolt rig, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you go back to Jim Gibbonson's blink ledgers in his book Carp, which was the lack of resistance to start with in that, and then suddenly, to me, a carp reaches that point of no return. You're trying to get inside its head in some way for that point of no return, where they suddenly find that they're feeling of self and they can't stop themselves. Then they run. And carp don't run away with a bait. That is not what they do. They're spooked into running. With the bait in the mouth, and it's getting inside their head to get to that point of no return, because the minute that the point of that hook hits, it's just got to be that they can't get rid of it. Whatever Nash is written about it, whatever, that you just have to get past that moment, that point of no return, and they can't stop themselves.
Now, when you talk about the big fish waters of Europe, Tim, and actually. You probably had a wry smile when you see the amount of UK anglers, a lot of younger lads now, going abroad and experiencing many of the same things that you would have done. It seems to be more popular than ever, the kind of exodus of younger anglers in search of something new in Europe. But when you reflect on those early days on those big fish waters, I know that the likes of Rod and Steve Briggs have been there a long time before, but were you eager to move outside of the match scene and kind of session fish these lakes and immerse yourself in the culture of
part of it?
Yeah,
there's no difference. It's you against the carp. Whatever.
So surely the match is entirely different, Tim.
No, it's you against the carp.
Right.
100%. 100%. And if you finish at winning, great.
But you had that. You were sacrificing an element of freedom. I presume there's the camaraderie, isn't there, with the match fishing? But part of the Tim Paisley I always enjoyed was your ability to amplify that solitude that you found on these places.
Yeah, but it's this just coming back to that Ernest Hemingway quote, something new beyond attainment. And I mean, 100%. Fisherville, okay, we won at Fisherville, but to go on the St. Lawrence, along like 20 miles of river, we were asked to go as sort of defending champions, in inverted commas, in 2005, with some of the best carp anglers in the world. It never entered our heads for a second that we would win that, and I mean that quite seriously. It's and I mean that prize of $96,000, which is still, I thought it was still the biggest prize in carp fishing. I'm told there has been a bigger one, but I'm going back to 2005, whatever that's worth now. All right, it was split 6 ways because we agreed to share between the 6 of us. No, that was huge. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's like climbing Everest in a way, but you're not risking. I mean, that is beyond attainment. I know they go up in droves now, but you're still risking your life.
Yeah. To
climb Everest, and you're giving up half the year to do it, to acclimatise and get all the stuff, and cost a bloody fortune. Pardon my French, and the rest of it. But in pigeon racing, or ballet dancing, or anything, you're trying to achieve the unachievable, aren't you? And the people, my 2 greatest heroes going away from carp fishing are Bob Dylan and John Lennon, because they never had the beginning. They made their beginning, which is to achieve on a global scale the way they did it from nowhere. I mean, I suppose Peter Mohan gave us the opportunity in terms of writing, and CoOp World probably gave people the opportunity. But on the scale they achieved, they never had that opportunity. They made it. They were hugely pioneers. Extraordinary.
I mean, in your position, Tim, you have published The Great and Good of Carp Fishing, but there must have been so many people that you are friends with and aware of their capabilities and their track record, who simply would not write, or could not be coaxed into writing, or couldn't write. Do you have any regrets about letting anyone slip by that?
Demo.
Right.
100%. Demo.
Right.
Or I've just spoke to him this morning about it, because I mentioned it when I was
has
away.
Written, hasn't he? He has written.
He has written. And he wrote for Every Picture Tells a Story. And I know what his record is, and it's second to none.
Yeah.
100%. And he said, yeah, if he did do a book, he would do 10 copies for the family. I thought, well, no, I'd like people to know what these people have achieved. It's as simple as that. And it's like Danny. I've written about, I do a column for Carpology now, which the first edition was out. And Joe Wright came to me and said he wanted a column looking back at Carp Talk, and picking up on Carp Talk items and expanding them and whatever. So the first one's just been published. The second one, there's quite a lot of Danny in it, and Damo and these guys, because Danny is so exceptional, and people won't know. I've interviewed Danny 3 times. The second time was right at the far end of Walthamstow, which is day ticket water. And I thought, of all the places you could be fishing, Danny, you're hiking, you must get up at 3 a.m. to come here, walk a mile, because he was right up at the far end of Walthamstow 1, is it? Whichever it was. Took some pictures of him there, bless him. The third time I went to interview it, I won't even mention which county it was in, because I was sort of given a postcode to meet him at a pub in the middle of Norfolk or Cambridgeshire or whatever the hell it was, because he's always fishing, isn't he? And he's fishing such difficult waters and under such difficult circumstances. Seeing what Danny did for specialist angling politically, he made available $20,000 a year for 5 years, I think it was, for the furtherance of specialist angling politically. You know, they've achieved so much through embryo, you know, and I think Matt is just a brilliant guy, absolutely brilliant. And I was saying to Damo, either Danny is hugely perceptive when he chooses his people, or he's very, very lucky, you know, because he's got such, and I don't know all the Korda people, so I hope I'm not missing anyone out, but I photographed Tom Dove when he won the junior championships, because we used to run them in those days. Photographed him being presented with the prize by, and that's in the book, by Terry. You know, and Danny's got such a great group of people about him, very low key in terms of what he does, what he's caught. I mean, one of my, and I broached this with Danny once, and I forget where it was, but we had dinner together, a big group of us. And I know Frank Warwick and I were talking about watching Carp in the Edge. Have I told this story before?
No.
Watching Carp in the Edge. Going back many years here. And Danny said, I'm not interested in their reactions to entacles. And we sort of bantered and talked about it. Next thing, the underwater series came out, showing exactly what that was about. And I mentioned it to Dan. Yeah, you're quite right. He said, yeah, I did. I'd changed my mind. So, that's big on you, Dan, to say that. No, and I just think it's been great for carp fishing. I mean, I was involved with the Predation Action Group for 10 years, beating our heads up, but it will come home to roost, because, you know, nature cannot survive the level of predation we've got. These 4 main predators are protected by European law and under the Wildlife Act, you know, and why cormorants are protected, I do not get one bit. But then you add goosanders and mergansers to that, what they're doing. Fortunately, the salmon people have finally accepted that predation has got something to do with, you know, the state of the salmon rivers. So the salmon people, once the salmon people exert some influence on predation, then we will get some sort of benefit from that. But coarse angling, you've only got to read anything by the Environment Agency. They couldn't give a damn about coarse angling. They couldn't give a damn about barbel. And you read anything by the Environment Agency, they still refer to carp as vermin, which is extraordinary. You know, so it will take the game anglers coming in and achieving something on predation for us to benefit from it. But so what Danny has done has sidetracked all that and the achievement of carp waters. I just think it's mega.
I always saw you, Tim, as someone who was happy to step up and represent angling within, be that within angling politics or be that within politics more generally. I don't see an appetite from people these days to do that. Someone
will come. I've never been forceful enough to stand up and be counted at that level and take the flak, if you know what I mean. I will research. I will go into print about it. But it's then, it needs, you know, people flatteringly compared me to Walker. No, Walker would have taken it on. He would have taken it on. He would have battered at the doors of the Houses of Parliament. He would have been forceful. And it needs something. You say, Danny is great, but he's not a committee man. And I gathered that straight away. When the Predation Action Group was formed, Danny, you know, he's his own leader sort of thing, and he will appoint people to take on whatever, which is great. The fact that he will do that is great. But until we get, and it's why I've included a chapter about predation, it might just influence that one person who will come forward who can have influence at the sort of level that we need influence in. Because the Angling Trust are beholden to the Environment Agency. They are beholden to the Environment Agency for grants, which makes it difficult for them to confront and take on the Environment Agency in areas that we need to take them on. You know, so there's a catch-22, which I understand. And I'm not the person. You know, Julian could do it if he would come out of his shell and go and batter at the House of, because he knows the law. There was a law precedent saying by the Gamekeepers Association, it was set that in the just making legal decisions, you cannot take into account public opinion. Right. The Angling Trust is held back by public opinion on furry and feathery creatures. And the law there's a precedent set that you cannot take that into account, but they are doing it. And it's why they cannot take on the government, because the government have said to them, don't you dare go near otters. So we are being influenced by public opinion, and we shouldn't be.
I think I know a few people in the Environment Agency, and there are some good people there, Tim, that are very much on our side. The thing that occurs to me, there's actually two things. One is the scandalous lack of funding that organisation now enjoys.
I agree.
The second is that it does and always will have a slightly schizophrenic attitude to angling, given that its key aims exist to both promote angling and to promote other forms of wildlife. So I don't know how you ever reconcile that.
I don't.
While it exists in the form that it does currently.
No, because it should have been funded from licences. And the Environment Agency is funded from licences and hands on what it's willing to hand on. So where you've got, 22 million, how many licenses? No, the income is 22 million, isn't it? Yeah. And you've got 15,000 full members of the Angling Trust. The figures don't stack up at all. And this was the first route we went down, and we were told it would take an Act of Parliament to change it. All right, so someone should be pressing for that Act of Parliament. But we were I think we felt a bit toothless in the end. But the salmon people researching, I did a huge amount of research. And it's all there about the impact on game fishing and the salmon rivers, all of which are falling below government requirement. All of them are falling below government requirements.
How much onus should there be on industry, Tim, to contribute to angling politics, do you think? Would you, as someone who was in the industry yourself, would you have dipped into your pocket to do that?
Well, we did. And I never got any expenses or whatever. It's a small thing. We would contribute to anything. But I will make the point that where we wanted people to stand up and be counted for predation, there were certain consultants we would have liked the opinion of who were told not to go near it by the manufacturers because of the otter issue. Honestly. So that is not the industry being unanimous in terms of predation, which it isn't, because they are frightened of the backlash. Can
there someone like the Angling Trust, under what has to be said is very encouraging leadership with Jamie Cook, can they pull the industry together? Is that possible? Is it all too fragmented?
Too fragmented.
Right.
Hugely fragmented.
Is it a regret of yours, Tim, that you weren't able to do more on this?
I blew myself up with the seminar that I organised at Doncaster, the predation seminar, where we've got a great lineup of speakers. RSPB were going to speak, because the one thing we've got in common with the RSPB is the number of reserves and waters that are fenced, which is great. We're creating numerous nature reserves now. At least the wildlife is safe within these mini reserves. The RSPB have got over 40 reserves fenced, which are huge areas, huge tracts of land. The only place you're going to see lapwings now is in these reserves. The only place, and they finally used the word otters in relation to the predation that they were fighting against. For long enough, they just talked about badgers and foxes, which is fair enough. But in the end, one of the tern colonies in Scotland, they had to admit that the nesting success rate went through the roof when they put up otter fencing. And otter fencing is very different from predation fencing, because you have to bury it. As you know, you have to go down a foot or 18 inches, so they can't burrow under it. So in the end, the RSPB, which is big on controlling predators within the law, admitted that otters were part of the problem. We all know otters are huge on the problem. So, no, there is this huge body of opinion within the concerns that matter. It's like, I come back to this gamekeeper thing. You cannot make a legal decision on the basis of public opinion. And the Angling Trust is being guided by public opinion because the government says so where predation is concerned. Now, how I'll get round, I don't know.
How do you, Tim, because you're a guy that, through the lens of your camera, it's become a real passion, hasn't it? I know that the bird side of things and the wildlife side of things, how does that fit around your angling? Is it still something you're really interested in?
Part of it. It's all part of it, hugely so. You know, and late in the book, I came upon this word imagery, you know, and I included a chapter about imagery in all its. You see, Yatesy was so huge. I mean, Yatesy made his career with a 2.25 camera, because Yatesy, I'm going back to the late 60s, early 70s. Yatesy created images within his camera. And that was before all this equipment that we've got now, where they can do it now on computers and amazing. And he had the market to himself, just amazing, creating book covers, advertisements, record covers, thousands of them he did, creating these images within a camera. So I started writing about, you know, this is all imagery. You know, this book, when you think about it, because there are 900 illustrations, some of which have had to be paintings or drawings of things I didn't have illustrations for. Belatedly, and I used it in belatedly, I used a brand mill. I noticed it's a brand mill's carving.
Yeah, downstairs. Yeah.
Brilliant imagery, and I didn't think to include carvings in this, but anything that is recording something artificially on computers through a camera, it's all imagery, isn't it? It's all creating. So to me, trying to explain the huge attraction of carp fishing and the bivvy life is the bird life, the natural life, the dawns, the sunsets. You know, if I'll just sidetrack a bit there. One of the stories I tell in there is Mary and I went to Fisherville once for a winter session when we were still promoting the place when it first started out. And very, very frosty session, and I was getting one brief window of activity just around first light, sort of half an hour before sunset, 40 minutes before sunset, when I caught one morning, and maybe we photographed it later. And I said, well, tell you what, Mary, because she was staying in the flat and I was bivvying out. Tell you what, tomorrow morning, if I catch a fish, I'd like you to come out and take a picture with the sun rising over my shoulder as a trophy shot. He said, how do you mean? I said, well, what I want, you know, you get the camera and I'll hold the fish and the sun will... No, how do you know where the sun will be coming up? I said, well, because it came up there yesterday and it'll come up there tomorrow. No, I just thought I was taking... Yeah. Anyway, it worked. There's a great picture in there of the sun coming up over my shoulder, right? Now, Nick Elliott, Bill Cotton's big mate, we were having a discussion at Birch Grove when we first had Birch Grove, and we were trying to figure out where North was in relation to Birch Grove exactly, you know, like carp anglers do, and you're trying to imagine. And I said, well, you know, we're in the summer, so the sun will be rising and setting north of east and west. And Nick Elliott said, how do you mean? I said, well, you know, we're in the summer, so it'll be rising and setting north of east and west. No, it rises in the east and sets in the west. Well, he wouldn't have it. He was a lifelong carp angler. He would not have it. Anyway, I managed to get a graph for this to show where the sun rises and sets. I had to get permission from one of the government departments to use it in here, explaining where the difference is between the different latitudes that the sun. But it just amazes me that, like a non-carp angler, my then wife Mary, bless her, and Nick Elliott. So you just wonder how many people who never see the sun rise and set have any concept of how different it is in terms of where it rises and sets through the year. So that's just a byproduct of imagery, what I was talking about.
Do you find that that whether it's through words or through the capture of these images, that each holds the same fascination for you still, Tim?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%.
Do you think you've reached that?
It's a moment. You know, you're not... An image is a moment, isn't it? And it's a memory. You know, and they're all fragmented, different memories. You know, there's a picture of a nuthatch. I used to create an artificial bird table at Rainbow, you know, and just sit with the long...
This is how slow the fishing could be.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you sit with the long lens on your lap like the kingfishers. I've got some great kingfishers, but you have to be ready all the time because they suddenly appear. You then can't start rummaging for your lens and whatever, which I had to do first. I mean, the first decent kingfisher shots I got, I wasn't prepared for it. And that was in swim 17 at Rainbow. And he came and perched up near the rod tip. And I had the camera behind. I had to change the lens to get the long lens on. Didn't get it right first time because I'm like fumbling around. Got it right the next time. And he sat there for a quarter of an hour, this kingfisher.
I mean, imagery is clearly very important to you, and it seems like we've got more and more outlets for that these days than we've ever had. Carp fishing imagery, that is, whether it's Instagram, whether it's subsurface, carpology, even the stuff abroad with the monkey climber stuff, they're all very image led. But in fact, your carpology articles recently have been talking about the importance of imagery in your in the whole of the carp fishing sort of in the scene, I suppose.
Well, in everything when you think about it, because what's television but imagery? What are films but imagery? So really, my writing about imagery and illustrating it was imagery in connection with carp fishing. The biggest example I would give in my case is the painting I got Claire to do of my 4 biggest influences on the dam wall at Redmire, which cost me a lot of money, and I've just did a limited number of prints, and that is Fred Wilton, Rod Hutchinson, Chris Yates and Dick Walker on the dam wall at Redmire.
That's a tall bunch of blokes right there, isn't it?
It was a tall bunch of blokes. Yeah, it was a tall bunch. And it amazed me. I'm in a group with Nashi on one of my pictures, and I mean, I'm 5'11", and I'm a dwarf compared to most of these guys. I mean, Fred, I think Hutchie was 6'3". I think Yates is similar. Fred was of a similar dimension. Walker was, well, even for his era, Walker was 6'2".
Yeah.
Which is amazing for back then.
No, Yates, I think Yates is 6'5". He's taller than me, and I'm knocking on 6'4". So
he's pure magic. Mad as a snake, but pure magic. And he wouldn't mind me saying that.
No, of course not.
Because he's not normal.
No, it's a badge of honour, Tim, I think, for Chris, isn't it? Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that. We cut a minute ago, and no one will notice this, but one of the things that you said really stuck with me, and that is the fact that you've switched off from all external stimuli when you're fishing, and actually it's something that I and probably my generation really struggle with now. I have lost all sense of concentration thanks to social media. My ability to concentrate on anything has to be a complete commitment to it. If I want to read something, Tim, now I've got to get over that hurdle where my brain is like flick, 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 and it wants constant scrolling.
Yeah.
And now I remember that in your writings from the 90s that you were the radio was a constant source of companionship, and the football scores were a big thing on a Saturday afternoon.
And they still would be, but the biggest example I'll give is winter fishing, where I changed completely on this, because you need every bit of help you can get on winter fishing, and sound can be very, very directional. So people might sit and watch the water all day on a water that never fishes during the day and nothing moves. Put television on at night, have the radio on all night or whatever, and they can't hear the thing. So that was when I stopped all the external influences, because I'm a light sleeper. So I want to lie there, and it's difficult getting through the dark hours. You go to Rainbow and you're tired out, knackered after for the first couple of nights you get a good night's sleep, because a lot of my winter fishing, a lot of my rainbow fishing has been winter. So what I stopped doing was external influence, because I wanted to listen for sound. So winter nights now, I'm dozing and I'm listening for sound. And just one sounding, one sighting can be huge, as it was for that mangrove winter. I found the fish through one sighting, that mangrove winter, when I had the 39 fish. And one fish, and it will be directional. You can't get exact. One fish, and we've all been through that. We half hear something. You're looking for the ripples then to see what direction they're coming from. Even if it's just for the encouragement of knowing there's something out there in front of you. So, and it sounds ever so boring, but let's be realistic. If you do it properly, carp fishing is ever so boring, isn't it? You're doing it for an end result.
But I always found that your writing was celebrating that stasis, that solitude, and the fact that time moved slowly at times. In fact, do you still follow Sheffield Wednesday? Is that that must be punishment enough? I mean,
well, Peterborough 4-0 was a great punishment. No.
But the burble of the football in the background, perhaps a doze, whatever it is you do in the afternoons in the winter. But I loved that sense of the slowing of time that you were able to conjure.
I just think more and more and more I live a carp session, and I live the carp fishing element of our, because to me, boredom is a luxury. In this day and age, I really think boredom is a luxury.
Is that what you might call, people have termed mindfulness? Are you able to be mindful? Are you able to be in a moment, if that's not too sort of like hippie, if you like?
I use an expression after a birch winter, that birch or winter nights are long, but winters are brief. And looking back, winters are brief. And the more you look back, everything was brief. So that, and I know I'm going on about this, the older you get, but the older you get, the more you appreciate the people, the more you appreciate just being there. And however much boredom can hurt, and some of the days on the mangrove were just interminable. They're gone forever, and you think, what did I do? For God's sake, you photograph birds, you look for fish, you listen for sound. You might do the odd crossword where you can look up quickly where I'm doing, but sound can be such a huge help. That I switched off on the radio, and I've never really watched videos or anything else, and I just live carp fishing and watch. I just love it. Just love the bivvy life.
Oh, we need to address, Tim. One thing we need to address is your incredible longevity within carp fishing, as well as more generally. You're someone, you're incredibly lucid still, you're incredibly physically well, it seems, and you're able to go out and carp fish still. You've put it on record several times, but this was a conscious thing that you feel like you were able to engineer, isn't it?
Fred Wilton engineered it, actually. Yeah, because when I read Fred Wilton on carp, which I couldn't fully read until the third British Carp Study Group book came out, which I think was 82. And I thought, well, and then you see, nutrition wasn't a subject at school when I was at school. I left school in mid-50s. Sex wasn't a subject that was ever discussed at schools, which would have been helpful as you go along. All sorts of things that, is taught now, wasn't then. And nutrition certainly wasn't. So, and I thought, well, if carp need all that, what do we know? I didn't know the difference between carbohydrates and proteins or anything about vitamins and minerals. So I'd been trying to give up smoking for 6 years. Read Fred, gave it up instantly. I thought, well, I'm quite sure carp fishing ain't part of health. Smoking isn't part of health. Gave up smoking. Started on vitamins and minerals, because I know that the older you get, the less capable your body is of extracting everything from what you eat, what nutrition was. And I've become more discerning over the years in terms of what I take. And you see, the biggest of all to me, apart from personal things that you need, Stephen Hawking was convinced that there were some substances were brain food. And early on, probably about 15 years, I read that ginkgo biloba and ginseng, the combination, was brain food. And I got on the ginkgo biloba, because one of the dreads you've got, the two big dreads as you get older, one is a stroke. So you've got to keep, reasonably, your body supplied with the vitamins and reasonable amount of exercise. And the other is dementia, that you become a burden to yourself and society and whatever. So the brain food thing became a huge part of it. And I'm as good with crosswords now, and the various things. And compiling books of that nature, where you've got 900 illustrations that you can't duplicate, 900 captions, and captions are an incredibly boring part of putting a book together that you've got to try and describe. But you see, I've used a prologue in this for the first time. I can't think of the word that you used for them. Because Derek Stritton described, when he was a teacher, the value of pictures in terms of teaching, guiding people onto the words. So to me, I've learned from carp fishing that picture books ain't a huge success. So this is a combination of 900 illustrations and 125,000 words, which includes the captions, And the compiling of that is like a giant jigsaw puzzle, really. And you need your mind intact. The 4 books I've done over the last 4 years have been the climax of my book compiling and writing, if you like. The Hutchins Yates one, where you're dealing with other people's pictures and the descriptions of them. But that is because within reason, my mind is still intact. And I'm really, more than anything, I'm proud of that my mind is still intact.
I mean, it's incredible, Tim, that, you know, not just intact, but sharp. I think that's so rare, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, you know,
maybe. In
my experience, it's rare. Now, have you peaked in terms of the supplements you're taking, or did you say you'd find that down, or you actually find yourself taking more?
No, I've just started on one, because the big regret I've got at the minute, I've got worn cartilage in my right knee, and I've actually gone to the trouble of going to the doctors about it, which isn't like me, you know. I put up with things, but it's limiting the amount of exercise I can do, because I was still a member of the golf club, and I would play golf twice a week. My leg wasn't, you know, I had to use a buggy, but even in golf, you're putting a lot of pressure on that right knee.
Yeah.
Went to the doctors, started reading up for supplements. Now there's a new one out, incredibly, called Activate. I've actually alerted Kev Knight to that someone else has got a substance called Activate, because it's got 8 ingredients that are huge for joints. And I started that literally 3 days ago. It is not cheap. The initial course, I've spent 200 quid on it, because I'd like to get back to exercising. So no, I never ever stop on this search for something that can try and keep me as a normal human being for as long as possible.
Because carp fishing is actually, you know, you say about golf, surely carp fishing is very, very physical as well. Just getting around your swim, getting to the swim. If the terrain is difficult, you know, there's lots of...
The two frustrating pursuits in beautiful places. That's what carp fishing and golf have in common. You know, the frustration of them both, the sense of triumph when you achieve anything meaningful in either of them. And the longer you go, you know, and that is what we're beyond attainment, which is what I admire about Darryl. Beyond attainment, when you set out on that track, you think it is beyond attainment. You're trying to do something people haven't done before. It's like Jacko and I eventually won the World Carp Classic, mainly thanks to Jacko that session, after 19 years of trying, for God's sake. You know, I mean, Briggsy and I got very lucky, or rather Briggsy is as special as I think he is. You know, but it's an achievement. Whatever people say, oh, I'm not interested in match fishing, or yeah, okay, but it's you against the carp. It's all you against the carp.
I mean, when I hear you talk about beyond attainment, what I see from you now feels like beyond attainment for most people. Beyond most people's aspirations to be fishing deep into the territory that you're now charting.
Do you know, that's what I look back at. It was beyond attainment. You know, how did that happen? And that is part of going back through it all. Because and the more you achieve, the more commonplace it becomes, you know, sort of, well, and you'll see interviews after people who've just achieved medal-wise, Olympic medal. It hasn't sunk in yet. And it never will sink in, because then there's an element of, well, if I could do that, anyone could have done it. You know, they've forgotten the fact that they used to get up at 3 every morning and get driven to the swimming baths by their dad or their uncle or whatever, you know, and throw the routine out for 4 years to achieve what they've achieved. The minute you achieve it, you've reached that pinnacle. It's achievable by anyone, you know, which I know isn't true, but it's the rationalisation that goes through your mind.
Now, what in terms of your carp fishing now, Tim, you've mentioned you've got a rainbow trip, I think, coming up. I heard on the grapevine that you might have an English ticket or two as well. You've still got ambitions within carp fishing, clearly.
Well, now I've got, you know, I've been on the back burner for 5 years now because of these books. Because you start some of these books and you have to live in them. And you can't live carp fishing and live that at the same time. It's like when Mary was terminally ill, you know, I didn't carp fish for a year to live through what Mary lived through, bless her. The same with these. You just have to live in these books. So you can't get as involved as you want to be. And I mean, I've gone to the Birch opening each year and dabbled, simple as that, which I'll do this time. I've got, I can fish Girton whenever I want, which is near Newark, which is the water with 2 big commons in it, 160 plus, which is 20 minutes from home, you know, which is nice. And I can go
in
there.
My head, I'm kind of envisaging you catching the biggest one of those 2 at like 68 pounds.
It's not my ambition, man. It's not my ambition in the least. If I catch, you see, my ambition now is to catch 35 plus English common, you know, which I've got a session, because Damo's a member of Farriers now, and I've got a week on Farriers in the autumn, through an auction that I purchased in an auction. So I've told Damo to give me his dates because I'd love to fish with Damo again, which I've done in the past. So my ambition now is to go and enjoy carp fishing again and catch a 35 plus English common. And anything that sounds that buzzer now is going to be enough. Honestly, it's going to be enough because it will be being there and living with the sun about to rise or watching the sunset or capturing. I mean, when I went to Les Tayats, had that big result at Les Tayats, which was, I got so lucky because there was no one else on for the first week. It was bizarre. But I was trying to get a picture of this bird that I couldn't recognise at the time. And I've just lost the name of it for the minute. And I didn't get it. So and I nearly got it. Oh, what's the fish that booms, that lives in? Bittern. Bittern. And I didn't realise they were bitterns until afterwards. And I nearly got a close-up of a bittern. I've got a picture of a nightingale on the rods, which was enough in itself. And I had that brace of 70s that week, that epic week that I had on Les Tayats. So that is part of the bird photography was a big part of what I was doing at Les Tayats. And it will be from now on. I'm almost, if I could afford it, I might get a bigger lens to bring some of these birds within closer range. But part of it is that alertness, because they don't want the radio on. If you've got warblers in the swim or great tit, I'd love a decent picture of a long-tailed tit, which is my favourite bird, and I've got some from a distance. They might be at rainbow this time around. And if you're sitting in your bivvy looking at the water and they come each morning, they stay together, long-tailed tit families. If they get, which I discovered at the end of one of my rainbow sessions, they were visiting a bush behind me every morning. And it wasn't until I was having a wee one morning at the other, oh God, I've missed my chance with these, So I'd love a decent picture of a long-tailed tit because, so I've got all sorts of ambitions still in carp fishing, all sorts.
But they sound like, maybe your ambitions have always been modest. Maybe these achievements have come to you in a way. No,
they've not always been modest, particularly as an editor. As an editor, you're trying to prove yourself. I'm not an editor anymore. I'm a contributor. And I can only write about the past for so long. It's very nice that Joe Wright wanted me to do this new form of journalism for which I'm enjoying doing because it brings back so many memories, links me to so many people I've known in the past. Damo commented on that bit I'd done about Phil Harper and I didn't discover till recently that Phil died last November, and I thought it was a magic bloke, Phil Harper, So I've written about him for that first column in Carpology, so there's an expansion there of my horizons. But sooner or later I'd like to do a bit about rigs because I've always been very riggy, and I've hardly ever I've contributed to the first Korda rig book, in point of fact. It's always been very riggy, but it's never been part of my remit for writing, to be honest, because it's location and it's the bait, it's the rig, it's the location, it's the understanding feeding times. I think one of my biggest things is to know the feeding times and to have everything, apart from casting to the showing fish or whatever. My biggest thing with feeding times is don't interfere with them. Have everything in place 4 or 5 hours before they're going to get catchable. Then they might make a mistake. I've watched people arrive on the syndicate waters and make so many mistakes because they've arrived on Friday afternoon. Well, hang on a minute, fella, it's a feeding time. Stop doing what you're doing and put a couple of stringers out. That's all you can do. Then when it gets dark, which to me on most waters, certainly on Rainbow, when it first gets dark, most of the waters I've been on, that 2 hours, that is the quietest time, and that is the time I make changes. That the quietest period is when you make your changes, so you're not interfering with their natural movement.
Carp fishing can be an activity that demands time out of life.
Yeah.
Do you feel like every second of yours has been well spent, the time you spent carp fishing?
Not life. We're talking about two different things, aren't
yes.
we? Yeah.
It has the commitment to spend that time because you have done some long trips. You've been regularly fishing for a long time. That is an awful lot of your life spent on the bank.
I've described cornerly, very cornerly, one of the chapters in that book, my first day on the mangrove. I've described it as the first day of the rest of my life, because it was so influential. I'd already, Snowbury influenced me, and I was part of a normal life, Snowbury time. I became part of an abnormal life. I've dedicated the book to my 2 children, bless them, who I wasn't a great father. We've become close over the years, but you live with what you went through, what you put people through. So I've described in a lot of ways, because I wasn't in a relationship that first day of the mangrove. And since then, I suppose I've been a professional carp angler. So whoever I've been involved with, which is 2 great women, Mary Carp World wouldn't have been the success it was without Mary. Brilliant. Everyone loved her. Absolutely huge. She loved catering for masses of people, Carp Society. So Mary was a great person, special. And Julie, who's my partner now, I've known for 20 years, and knew Mary. I actually started to get together with Julie in Rod Hutchinson's kitchen, because Mary is the partner of Rod Hutchinson's last partner. The sister of Rod Hutchinson's last partner. So the women I've been involved with, the ladies I've been involved with since the mangrove, have all known that carp fishing is the most important part of my life, if I can put it that way. Mm-hmm. So it hasn't been a conflict since then.
Do you think you'd have struggled, Tim, if you'd been made to feel that it was a selfish pursuit? Could you have allowed yourself to think that?
Well, you didn't you? Yatesy was honest enough in his to say he went home to find the lady of his life he was going to marry had gone. My brain must have been diluted by water. I mean, his description of that, he was quite honest. Then he later became a single parent. He held his hand up to the fact that carp fishing destroyed his real life. Hutchie did the same. There'll be thousands of stories like that. I won't say I was in a life that I wasn't suited for, put it that way, and carp fishing became a life that I was suited for. And the women who've been part of my life since then have accepted that. That's the strongest way I can put it. Because I couldn't have lived with the conflict indefinitely.
And when you look at the book in front of you now, Tim, is it a? Do you feel you got it right? This one.
I'd like it to have been twice as big, but you can't do that.
It is huge. I should point out this thing it's got to be a couple of kilos there.
Well, it's 125,000 words and 900 illustrations is the way I look on it. Maybe too big, but I've left out 10 chapters. It's as simple as that. 10 more chapters. So I've left out
another book,
maybe 10,000 words, because some of these chapters are only 400 words. I've kept it as punchy as possible to include as many pictures as possible.
I mean, you could be forgiven at this stage in your publishing life to be self-indulgent, but you haven't been in terms of keeping things punchy and relevant. You could have dragged this out and made it sort of all-encompassing.
No, because then you need your publisher, don't you? So and it's got to be commercially viable. No, I think that's a pretty selfish endeavour, to be honest. But it was every picture tells a story. There were things I wanted to say, and then you think, shall I include predation? I thought, well, I've got to really, because it was such a big and you hope that parts of this will be inspirational, that people will pick up on it and become the greatest author ever, or the greatest photographer ever of carp fishing, or the greatest record, or will have an influence in terms of predation. So some of the things are included. Hopefully, they will inspire people to pick up on where I've not been able to go, if you like.
And do you think it's that whole I'm never drinking again thing? Do you think this genuinely will be your last book? Because I've
never said I'm never drinking again. Wait a minute.
No, hold on.
No, where did that come from? Hang on a minute.
Hang on, that was me.
I protest.
That was me. And that didn't work either. But yeah, part of I've read your books. They've been very important to my carp fishing, and over many years now. I'd like to think that this isn't the last book. Do you think you could be tempted to do more? A volume 2, maybe?
Well, I think, was it Damo or yourself I talked to, where BB had this expression, if I am spared, which presumably arose from the Second World War, which he would have lived through, and his friends, he would lose friends in that. Fred J, the great Fred J, had this expression, God willing. You know, I'm 86 in August. The average life expectancy now, believe it or not, for males is 86. So I might have another 10 years in me. I might have another 10 days in me. You know, so if I've only got another, it's difficult to plan a new book at my age. If something inspirational, carp are inspirational, and carp fishing is inspirational. If something comes up, unfortunately, I've still got a publisher who believes in me enough to publish a book of mine, which is a huge thing about opportunity, a huge thing. So I can't speak strongly enough about Wayne Kraut, who took on the Little Egret, which with respect to his predecessor didn't have a great reputation at the time. Hutchie started to put it right. You know, he's since done the Hutchinson Yates book. He's since done the first ever volume of Yates's, which is great for them. But he's still going out on a limb. You know, he did the Fred J book, which wasn't commercially, it wasn't a huge success, which is an understatement. So I've all the time in the world. But M Press is still doing books, great, but there aren't that many more people you can go to and have a carp book published, you know. So the fact that we've still got publishers who are willing to take a chance, you know, maybe lose their house in terms of publishing books, is absolutely great. But carp fishing needs them, because the internet will only go so far, and there will be a generation emerging that wants to read about things and wants the permanent record of things, you know. So you just hope that you're part of that.
Well, Tim, given, you know, the influential books that you've written, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that you will be part of the discussion, you know, of carp fishing long into the future. So listen, thank you so much for coming in. It's been an absolute joy. We could have gone on and on and on, and you know, do you know what? Maybe we should do another one in a year or something, see what the next book looks like. But
God willing.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I just say, yeah, and I take all that on board, but I am just me, you know, and everything comes as a big surprise. It's like you're talking about beyond attainment, you know, and you look back, and it's a lot of it was the first time Hutchie asked me to do anything, who me, sort of thing. So a lot of it's who me. So anyone who's just coming into carp fishing or part of carp fishing, have your heroes, you know, but don't underestimate yourself in terms of what you may be capable of. You know, if you've got some belief in whatever avenue of life it is, go for it, because you might turn out to be the greatest ever, which ain't suggesting I'm the greatest, but you might be. So do it, go for it.
The Thinking Tackle